Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Codependent Dummy podcast. This is your hostess, mostess, Marissa, and today we are joined by Susanna Guarino. Susanna is a licensed mental health counselor in private practice, seeing clients in New York, Rhode Island, Arizona, and Florida. For all my peeps in New York, Rhode Island, Arizona, and Florida. She specializes in helping couples reconnect and heal their relationships, and she also helps individuals who have experienced religious trauma. Susanna, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Marissa.
Yeah. All right, so let's start with the typical two. First, Susanna, how do you define codependency?
How do I define that? I define it as when you lose your identity in becoming overly focused on caring for or catering to either someone else or a group.
Mm-hmm. Say more about the group, because I've heard a lot about the codependent other person pair, but yeah, I'd like to hear more about the group.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that dynamic can happen with a group too. So like what we're going to talk a little bit more is religious trauma, but basically in any organization, if people are encouraged to neglect their own needs for the good of the organization, and people are encouraged to not speak up about what they're thinking or feeling in order to kind of toe the line with the organization, that can train people to become codependent. Like they
Right.
sort of lose touch with what they really feel, what they really want, because they're being encouraged or manipulated by a group or an organization to put the organization first.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And before we dive into religious trauma, curious, Susanna, if you have any experiences of codependency from your own life that you can share with us.
What I could talk about is what I see clinically in couples work.
Okay.
So, what I see is that when there's some kind of codependent dynamic, a lot of times a lot of resentment has built up, and that can underlie a lot of these conflicts that are ongoing and feel unsolvable. And so until you kind of address that dynamic and also get to those underlying scratchy feelings that need to be talked about and expressed, it's hard to get out of that stuck place.
Mm-hmm. Right. So a buildup of resentment contributes to a sense of problems being unsolvable. And then we have to get to the scratchy. How come you say scratchy? Because they itch or it hurts or?
Like the feelings that a lot of times people that are struggling with codependency, they don't want to have those feelings or they think those feelings aren't appropriate. So again, I'm thinking more in a religious context. A lot of times it's not okay to feel hatred. It's not okay to feel angry. It's not okay to feel jealous. So those feelings go underground. And until you can really talk about them, they're driving a lot of behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And So with the couples work that yeah, the couples you see clinically, how do you help them get in touch with the scratchy feelings?
I think being able to talk about them openly, but without attacking or hurting the other person. I think that's why a lot of people are afraid to express their anger because they associate anger with hurt or abuse.
Right.
So being able to just talk about it, and then it's just a feeling versus acting on it by attacking. So creating a space where we can talk about whatever the feelings are, they're all okay, but where there's not simultaneous criticism or contempt or cruel behavior.
Right. Blaming, pointing fingers. I'm
Mhm.
angry because of you. It's just like, I'm angry at
Uh-huh.
this pattern, this trend, this overall dynamic.
Uh-huh.
Do you have an example from your clinical work?
Oh, an example of this dynamic. Mm, I think just generally, I've seen this with couples, both couples with religious trauma in their past, but also couples where there's been some kind of substance abuse issue.
Mm,
Um, all of that resentment built up, and it's so much more comfortable for people to just point the finger rather than stick with their own feelings and what they're needing, because it's a lot more vulnerable to do that. That's
mhm.
just the most common pattern that I see.
Right. And you sense being in therapy with you provides the space where you're able to guide them in expressing the feeling, talking about it, but not pointing the finger, or you kind of guide them towards talking about the feeling.
Yeah, that's the goal, Marissa.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Sometimes it takes a lot of work.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, being a recovering codependent, yeah, it's very hard to get in touch with my feelings without. I had another guest on recently. We talked about mother blaming. And
Mm.
yeah, she really tries to help her patients avoid mother blaming. I was like, oh, I've just gotten stuck in mother blaming, father blaming, partner blaming, boss blaming, right? All of it. And so yeah, that tightrope, it feels like at times, like how do I stay in this balance of feeling my emotions without just completely pointing fingers?
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I love that idea of mother blaming. I think our culture tends to do that a lot and not hold men accountable for their fathering.
So does the
Hmm.
field of psychology. All these men, right? They're like, oh, it's just the mom. The mom wasn't there for the child, and now the child is like this. It's like, what is it about the mother's position in this culture that makes her act like this? Huh? No? Anyone? No, we don't want to look at the context. Okay, let's blame the mom. Yeah. Okay, we digress. Um, Other thoughts on how you get and help people get in touch with the scratchy feelings um, in couples work?
Hmm. Well, a lot of it is interrupting the four horsemen, and
Hmm.
trying to get to the feeling from there. So, I'm Gottman trained. Do you know much about Gottman?
I do, but if you want to give the 101 summary for all of our codependent dummies, because we're learning.
Uh-huh. So the Gottmans are a couple who have just done tons of research over the last 40 years on what makes relationships work and not work. And
Right.
they got pretty well known because I think it was in the 80s or the 90s. They did a study where they could predict with like 95% accuracy whether a couple would still be together in 5 years.
After
Um,
how much observation?
I think it was like a weekend. They observed a
Yeah.
couple for like 20 hours over a weekend.
And they could call it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So rate this couple, researchers, what makes relationships works and not work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what they've done now is they train therapists, couples therapists in how to use this information to help couples. So a big part of that is obviously communication, being able to communicate like we talked about without attacking the other person, but also without letting everything go underground or never bringing stuff up, because that's how you get into
Mhm.
really damaging dynamics. Um, and so they'll talk about the four horsemen. So these are communication patterns that just rip apart relationships, they poison them. There's criticism, which we already talked about. There's defensiveness, which often goes hand in hand with criticism. So defensiveness is where you counterattack or you play the victim. Uh, and then there's stonewalling, which is when you just shut down and it's like you're not even present anymore. And there's contempt, which is the worst one, which is the really emotionally abusive one where you're putting the other person down and putting yourself in a superior position.
Hmm.
And that's really damaging over time to their mental and physical health. Like you're more likely to get physically ill if your partner is treating you with contempt all the time. So, in terms of helping couples talk about the actual feelings, a lot of the work is pausing when there's criticism or contempt, defensiveness or stonewalling, and just talking about what's happening in that moment and what is the feeling underneath that and what's the need that's not being expressed.
Hmm. Wow. To get to the scratchy feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Okay. Well, my sense is we could go on and on about this, but also you were here to talk about religious trauma. So everybody will bookend the amazing couples work Susanna does for another episode down the line. And I'm curious to hear. Well, we'll start with what is religious trauma?
Mm-hmm. So there's different definitions of this. My definition, as I was thinking about this for this podcast this weekend, how I would describe it, was a situation where religion or spirituality is used to control or manipulate behavior rather than promote love in the world, because all true religion and spirituality, in my opinion, is about love underneath and not about creating uh, obedient people or uh, controlling people's behaviors.
Mm-hmm. So when religion or spirituality is used to control and manipulate behavior instead of
Instead of increasing love in the world.
Mhm. Some examples of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 90s purity culture is one example. Are you familiar with that, Marissa?
I am, but I'd love to hear a short summary since we're dummies learning.
Yeah. So this was an unfortunate thing that swept the evangelical world in the 90s. And it was really all about controlling young people's sexual behavior, um, especially women. And so they were taught, like, there was a very famous book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye. They were taught not to, some people not to even kiss before marriage. Like, there was a lot of shame and fear used to encourage young people um, not to give in to their physical desires. And what that did was create a generation of young people with very confused, sometimes unhealthy relationships with their sexuality. So, for example, many women internalize that sense of shame around sexuality and they couldn't just turn it off when they got married. So, there are many women who struggle with enjoying sex in the context of
Mm,
marriage because of that internalized shame.
right.
And there's lots of other ways that it impacted folks, but basically, a lot of shame and fear was used to control young people's sexual behavior with long-lasting repercussions.
That did not promote love of themselves, love of
Mm-hmm.
their partner,
Mm-hmm.
love between partners,
Mm-hmm.
etc.
Right.
Mhm. Okay. Religious trauma. Any other thoughts on the definition?
So another example that's less like I think of purity culture as institutionalized sexual abuse. And some people might disagree with me on that, but that's how I see it. Another example of religious trauma could also just be like the moral injury of someone you admire and look up to spiritually abusing you or abusing someone else within a religious context. And I'm not just talking about Christian religious context. This happens in Buddhist groups. It happens in basically anywhere there is a group of people with a hierarchy. The person at the top uh, could use their position of power to manipulate or control others. Hopefully they don't, but when they do, that creates
Mhm.
the conditions for religious trauma as well.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Such a sad part of our history, right? You were talking about the 90s, but this is just like religion, religious trauma.
Right. It goes way back. And it's
Mhm.
really just a human thing. It's a human problem of people misusing their power.
Right?
So it's not like religion is the bad thing. It's that people within these contexts sometimes misuse their power, and that can lead to a very specific type of trauma.
Right. And here it can be institution wide.
Mm-hmm.
It can be perpetrated by individuals, leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, it can also be, I say like horizontal, right? So just
Mm-hmm.
like amongst peers in religions.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts on the definition of religious trauma?
I think that's all I've got for now.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, not wonderful, but yes, great starting point. And how can religious trauma relate to codependency?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a really good question, and there's so many ways. So I'm going to
Right.
try and summarize it somewhat coherently because my brain is kind of all over the place with this one. But
Yeah. And then we'll
uh,
unpack it and it'll
we'll
be
unpack.
amazing.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So in terms of when a religion is used to control or manipulate behavior, they do that using fear and shame. And so fear and shame shuts people down and makes them less likely to stand up for themselves. They also sometimes do that by using some spiritual bypassing techniques where they take a beautiful concept like generosity and forgiveness and use that against people in a way to like manipulate them into forgiving like their abuser in a way that's very inappropriate. And so people are kind of trained over time to be codependent, to lose their own identity in their willingness to support this organization or support this leader or this person.
Mhm. Can you give us the 101 definition of spiritual bypass? I think like codependency, it's overused and understood.
Yeah, yeah. So spiritual bypassing is when something that is a beautiful spiritual idea gets used in order to help people avoid personal growth. Or it can be used by someone in power to manipulate someone with less power.
Mm. So
So,
literal, go ahead. Yeah.
no, no, go ahead, Marissa.
No.
A phrase I heard recently, a colleague was talking about was this idea of toxic forgiveness. That's a spiritual bypassing thing where, um, you know, I have to forgive, and then you end up not setting boundaries that are healthy
Mm.
for you, and that leads
Right.
to more codependent behavior.
You don't have the conversation that, though difficult, might be, might like empower you long term. just like, oh, I'll just forget it. Let bygones be bygones.
Mm.
And yeah, but there's something about bringing it up or saying it that again would be potentially empowering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So religious trauma can relate to codependency since one can lose their identity through use of fear and shame to further the group, support the leader, yeah, obey the doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
Any other ways? Yeah, they can relate.
Mm-hmm. Well, specifically in a lot of these groups, especially in fundamentalist and evangelical groups, they're a little bit prone to putting women lower on the hierarchy. So women are really encouraged to accept their own inferiority. Like it's not, not in all, but in many, women can't be in positions of leadership. Men are considered the head of the house, and just naturally given more power and control in the family. Um, so in groups like that, it's really a setup for women to become codependent because they're indoctrinated into their own inferiority. So if the man's the head of the house, naturally you need to step back, not stand up for yourself, just accept kind of what his ultimate decision making is, and that can be really damaging to women who kind of internalize that. Women are also often sort of trained to be selfless and generous, which is again a beautiful concept, but then it gets manipulated and used against women, and they end up feeling like their identity comes from serving others, which can also be dangerous for them.
Mm-hmm. I love these words you're using: damaging, dangerous. How so? Yeah, what happens if I really do internalize this need to be selfless, to be generous, to form my identity around serving others? How
Mm-hmm.
does that, yeah, damage or danger me?
Right. And none of those are bad unless you are indoctrinated to do that to your own detriment. So I'm trying to think of an example that would show this. Basically, if you check in with yourself and you ask yourself, is this going to cause me to be resentful? Or am I doing this because I truly want to be generous and loving? Like, is this coming from my heart? That's how you can tell the difference. So if you're doing this because I should, because I've been told that I should, because the group is pressuring me to, because this is some outside message coming in that I need to do this or be like this, maybe that's codependent. Or if it's coming from a sense of I do want to give this as like a gift freely given, that's healthy.
Mm-hmm. That would be so, and must be, and I sense it has been so hard for me at times, like, in family or, yeah, even in my religion, to discern is, yeah, is this a gift that I freely want to give? Or am I doing this because I've been told countless times that service is a virtue, and I'm trying to meet whoever said that, right? I'm trying to please that standard. Your thoughts on how difficult it is to tell which is which?
Yeah, Marissa, that's the work, right? That's the work all of us have to do, especially in this culture. I feel like women get a lot of messages, even outside of religious context, that their value comes from service to others, which is totally beautiful. That's not wrong, but it's wrong if it's to your own detriment and it's not really coming from a place where you feel centered and grounded.
Mm-hmm. Right, there's no centering, There's no grounding. You're just, I don't know, just spread all over like a puddle. Um, yeah. Other ways religious trauma contributes to codependency.
Other ways, codependency. Well, in religious groups that get controlling, there's not as much space to have your own mind because you're told what to think, you're told what to believe, and you are expected to um, go along with the doctrine, like you mentioned earlier. And so that can lead to codependency too, because you like that intellectual muscle, using your own mind, thinking for yourself, can get a little bit weakened because you're used to being told what to think and what the truth is.
Mm-hmm.
And so the antidote to that is thinking more for yourself and using your own mind, but there can be a lot of in a controlling group there can be a lot of pressure to not do that and punishment for doing that.
Yeah. I was just watching, I haven't finished it, but there's a documentary on Netflix called Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey. And it's about a fundamentalist Mormon group. And they actually had a answer to when they were perplexed or confused or something wasn't right. And they were taught to put it on the shelf.
Oh my God, Marissa, that's what's called a thought terminating cliche.
Mm. Say more about that.
So that's a theory I heard about from Amanda Montell. She's a linguist who specializes in how cults work. But any group that gets controlling, they have what she calls thought terminating cliches. So it's something that they do to shut down your independent thinking, shut down your mind. So put it on the shelf, like you stop thinking about it, turned off. Nope, done. The thought is terminated with this
Mm.
cliche. We circumvent independent thought.
Wow. Right, which contributes to, I mean, complete dependency. If, yeah, like extreme
Right.
codependency.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what this woman, she was talking to her husband. She's like, but this doesn't make, and he, they've since gotten out. That's why they're sitting down to do this interview. But she was like, I asked him and he said, put it on the shelf. Put it on the shelf. Um, right. But I sense even in my codependent relationships, and I'm trying to think, but even, yeah, internally, I would just have rationale at times for other people's poor behavior. And I sense, yeah, either blame myself or excuse them. And then we could sustain the relationship.
Mm.
Like, like, I don't know, boys will be boys. And it's like, oh yeah, I guess I'm supposed to accept this type of behavior. Or,
Mm.
well, you should have said something. If you really wanted him to, if you really needed him to know, you should have said, I don't know, I appreciate respect. like I have to name everything. So yeah, thought terminating cliches. Any other thoughts on that connection with codependency?
Like not the connection with not thinking for yourself or being able to use your own mind.
Yeah.
Hmm. Um, I guess I'm just thinking, earlier you noticed the words dangerous. Like this is dangerous because you're in danger if you can't think for yourself, if you don't know what you're feeling, if you feel disempowered from expressing your feelings, whatever they are, because then you can't stand up for yourself and you can lose yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I've just having this montage of all these corners I've gotten myself into literally and figuratively, especially with men, just not saying anything. And then finally I like get in a corner and then I'll snap. But it's dangerous. Just these small slights over and over really can put you in a position where your safety is totally compromised.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, you did touch on this. I do still wonder any other thoughts on how, yeah, I'm not sure how many of the listeners are practicing a religion actively. If they're exploring something, they might tend to be more spiritual than religious. But if they are participating in some type of religion, how can other thoughts on how they can distinguish between like healthy and unhealthy service, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or right, a healthy or unhealthy embodiment of the virtues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, Healthy and unhealthy participation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a really good question too, and a bunch of things come to mind. But one is that I think these ideas apply outside of even religious groups. It's really any group. It could be like a yoga group. It could be a yoga group that you attend. It could be a workplace that you're working at.
Or
Um,
a family.
definitely a family. That's the number one original group.
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't make this up either. I got this from Bridget. I forget her last name, but she's a really great therapist who specializes in cults and controlling groups, and she has a great podcast. But she'll talk about um, what happens when you say no in any group or in any relationship with somebody else. How did they handle it when you say no? If there's a lot of pushback, or if they try to manipulate you in some way, that's a red flag for you to know. Um, or if they respect your autonomy and respect your free and independent mind, that's a good sign that this is healthy.
Mm.
And the
Okay.
other, oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I would say to look for is how are women and children treated? Are they treated as second class citizens who should be seen and not heard, who have a lower place on the hierarchy? Or are they treated with love?
And how come you sense, right? It's obvious, but also I'm curious to hear what what does fair treatment of women and children in a religion demonstrate?
It demonstrates that it's not all about control,
Mm.
because when it's men wanting to control women, then they'll put women into an inferior subordinate position and use their power to exploit or control them.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's more of an egalitarian group where everyone's voice is welcomed, that's a good sign of health. And when children are treated well too, because there are some conservative religious groups where children are treated very poorly.
Mm.
And that's a warning sign too of a group that's not healthy.
I'm just curious, like, how do they treat children?
So, spare the rod, spoil the child. That's a
Mm.
thought terminating cliche. Uh,
Right.
and there are, and again, this isn't all groups or even all fundamentalist groups, but there are many where children are expected to just to obey, and there's a big emphasis on obedience, which is really about parents and older adults being able to control behavior, um, and that leads to all sorts of trauma for children who grow up in those contexts, and even moral injury for the adults that are encouraged, say by a pastor or a leader. You have to break your child. You need to control them. They should be well behaved. Use these methods, spare the rod, spoil the child, and parents just will believe that and act that out, and then end up, you know, really regretting their actions.
Yeah. No, I have so I grew up Catholic, and one of the 10 Commandments, this is in Christianity, and it's also in the Torah, which is, yeah, kind of, they connect. One of the commandments is honor thy mother and thy father. And I've thought about that in context of my clinical practice, because so much of what I talk about and focus on with my patients is becoming conscious, aware, and working through their feelings towards their parents, which aren't always honorable, right? There's anger, there's grief, there's hurt, there's this yearning. And then, yeah, we're told, honor thy mother and thy father. And it's like, what? How am I supposed to? But they weren't nice, or they weren't there, or they weren't honorable all the time. And yeah, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's not black or white, right? Like, how can you honor them and have all your feelings
And honor yourself.
and honor yourself? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Like not murdering. It's like, okay, I can understand that, but honor my mother and my father all the time. All the time. Let's do this all the time. Right. But some people really do encourage and would argue for that. But what I'm hearing here, Susanna, is just it's a balance.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that in order to not become codependent, all your feelings, you have to be okay with all your feelings, not acting on them, but like having them. So when, the commandment says honor your father and your mother, I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm not totally sure what that means, but it probably doesn't mean have positive feelings towards your father and mother all the time.
Right.
It probably means something more like treat them with respect, which, why not? That seems healthy. But but have all your feelings too. Your feelings are
Right.
okay. Mm-hmm.
And the religious trauma or damage happens when it is taken to an extreme, and you're supposed to suppress, not acknowledge those feelings
Mm-hmm.
of annoyance, frustration, sadness.
Right. When your feelings are not okay, when religious ideas or spiritual ideas are used to manipulate or control you or shut you down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Mm, additional thoughts on healthy versus unhealthy participation in a religion or group?
Well, I guess I'm thinking about for people that have gone through some of this spiritual abuse, religious trauma, or some kind of controlling group, even like a controlling family group, who then develop some codependent tendencies later in life, whether this happened in their adulthood or their childhood. Um, I guess my mind goes to like how to work with that. So one thing is what we were talking about earlier, which is checking in with yourself and asking yourself, am I doing this out of a true sense of like love and generosity, or am I doing this because there's some kind of should behind it? Is
Mm-hmm.
is doing this going to make me feel resentful or not? Um, Also, I highly recommend, we're both therapists, so I'm sure we're biased for the field of therapy, but finding a therapist who,
1000%.
yeah, finding a therapist who knows something about religious trauma can be really useful. A lot of therapists don't. It's
Mm-hmm.
maybe not their specialty. And it's kind of a unique, like, it's a unique experience. So finding someone that can make space for that. Um, but whether or not you have someone like that in your area, just finding a therapist where you feel safe to have all your feelings and you can talk about whatever those feelings are. Um, and for a lot of people with religious trauma who grew up in controlling groups, they can feel pretty triggered by authority, or they can project onto the therapist this idea that like they're the authority figure that I need to please in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to talk about that openly with your therapist can be helpful too, or knowing that in yourself, that it really should be more of an egalitarian relationship, and like the therapist is not there to like tell you what's right and wrong, or um, but the therapist can help you work on your own feelings of shame and fear that you're carrying forward, and maybe like ingrained behaviors of losing yourself. It can
Mm-hmm.
also, for people with religious trauma, it can be hard to know what they want because they have been told what to want or told what to think. So giving yourself a lot of space to like do some self-reflection and like asking yourself, who am I, without all of that, which is a very scary question and a big question. And I don't think anyone ever really has a total answer, but allowing yourself to ask some of those questions is important too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you were answering this, the thought came to mind that your patients dealing with religious trauma, in a healthy sense, an identity crisis is part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Carl Jung, he has a quote, I'm gonna botch it, but a a pen pal of his was asking really direct questions about life. Do you know this quote?
No, no, tell me.
Oh, okay. So I read about it in the book 4,000 Weeks. Everyone, I'm obsessed with it. It's the time management book. And this pen pal writes to Carl Jung, and Carl Jung responds and says, the the questions you're asking don't have answers, right? They're and I'm totally botching it, but he's like, they're too deep, they're too profound, and they're too relative. Like you have to really answer what who you are, what life is, and what you're gonna make how you're gonna make meaning out of this life. And he says, if you want someone to give you all the answers, go to the Catholic Church. And then he's like, and if not, like just, put one step in front of the other and do the next right thing. And so that influence, he's heavily influenced the formation of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they have a slogan like, just do the right thing. Or what's the next indicated step? They ask themselves that. But I remember reading that. And yeah, it's if you want all the answers, go to the Catholic Church, which in Carl Jung's day was the leading, most popular, biggest population religious wise. And yeah, to leave something, to leave a religion, to become conscious of how you have been traumatized and then form an identity apart from that. That must be very hard.
It can take a long time.
Mm-hmm. Your thoughts on Carl Jung's quote?
I love it. I love Carl
Yeah.
Jung.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it was, it was, when I read it, I was like, jaw drop. Because again, grew up Catholic and I am on my own religious and spiritual journey, you know, with that. And I'm also a licensed therapist, right? So reading Jung, given my Catholic background, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, how do I find the balance?
Mm.
Um, yeah,
Mhm.
just making um forming my own identity. So interesting.
Mhm.
Other ways to heal from codependency caused by religious trauma?
Well, my mind is still with Carl Jung and that quote. I'm thinking about just how complicated it is. Um, like, is there a way to have your own mind even in a context that's religious? And I think there is. It's really, it's the when a religious group or a leader gets controlling or abusive and it's not about love anymore that I get worried. Um, but like outside of that, there's just so much nuance and gray area of what works for them, how they get their needs met, so it's not like I'm anti-religion or anti-Catholicism. Um, but I do love that Carl Jung quote also. And he raises a very good point. Although also with the Catholics, I think all many religious groups they have people that are a little more free thinking and people that are a little more dogmatic. And there is like a
Right.
very beautiful mystical history of some Catholics too that I think is a little more open to like those big existential questions and not having all the answers. Those are just my initial thoughts. But
Oh, totally. Yeah. Um, oh man, you just said something and I had a thought and it went away. Oh, well, I haven't written an episode about this, but I plan to how right me trying to find the balance of my religious and spiritual practice and a need to do that because in my own history, I I worshipped my ex-boyfriends. I treated former bosses like I don't know if it's deities or deities. And I I probably looked like, sounded like, and smelled like someone in a religion, right? With thoughts of prayer that weren't really, I wasn't consciously praying, but I was just so obsessive and like hoping for something in a relationship. And yeah, I was doing things throughout my days to please, right? But it was a person. And so for me, yeah, trying to find a balance between, yeah, how can I honor my relationships, honor myself, but yeah, also really work towards different virtues like patience and charity and um, patience, charity, generosity, um, temperance, right? Not like super controlling, but yeah, like just self-control.
yeah, like not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like there's so much that's beautiful and wonderful that you want. And how do you just watch out for, if it gets a little controlling or manipulative?
Yeah. Yeah, it is a yeah, a balance. Not doing it with humans in religious contexts and also like yeah, I'm sure people can be codependent with God or like a distorted version of God that isn't loving, that is punishing and
Mm,
controlling.
mm. That's a really interesting idea.
Your thoughts on it?
Oh, I mean, that's such an interesting idea. I'd have to think about that one for a while. You could probably do a whole episode on codependency with God and what that would look like and what it would look
Mm-hmm.
like to have a healthy interdependent relationship with however you define God.
Right. Yeah, I probably could, and I probably will. um, all right. Any additional thoughts on healing from codependency caused by religious trauma? I feel like I've said any other thoughts like 10 times today. I will come up with another way to say that, everyone. I'm working on my interview skills. Go ahead, Susanna.
Uh, I'm not sure if this is totally related to what you just asked, but the other thing that comes to mind in terms of religious trauma is just how damaged people in the LGBTQ community have been by some of these fundamentalist groups that preach that they're sinful and bad because of who they are. So if anyone in that community is listening, I have so much sadness around that, and it also makes me really angry. And so I just wanted to mention that as like another really important part of group of people that are impacted by religious trauma.
Mhm. Yeah. On a personal, institutional, and peer level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mhm. All right. So I guess, yeah, I do have one more question. Because it takes some awareness for people to even identify that they are being traumatized or abused in a religion. Um, right, it takes that, and then they reach out to you or they listen and resonate with this episode. If they're not aware of it, they're like, oh, what a nice topic. That doesn't apply to my life. Yeah, where do you sense that um like how do you sense that happens if they're just in this world where they're told like this is how you think and then they start to think otherwise?
Mm-hmm. How does that happen? Well, that could be a whole episode too, Marissa. Like, how do people go from being codependent with a group to thinking for themselves? Um, but it happens all the time because I think that people have a drive for to be healthy.
Mm, yeah, try to be healthy. Just a
Mm-hmm.
seed gets planted and then oh
Yeah, and some people get their needs met by being codependent, as you probably know, and they have no desire to change anything, which is also okay. That's their choice.
mhm. The hope is it just doesn't hurt anyone beyond them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So I'm curious, yeah, if someone is resonating, if this relates, they want to read more about you, where can people find you, Susanna?
Yeah, I have a website, goodearthcounseling.com.
Good Earth Counseling.
Uh-huh. And I do work with individuals and couples, online or in person. I'm in person. I'm located in Rochester, New York. Um, Online, I'm licensed in a few different states, so Arizona, Florida, Rhode Island, New York. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And on my website, I do have a freebie. It's a how to make a kick-ass apology. For your audience, Marissa, I know we talked about this. I'm not sure it's totally appropriate. Like all of us codependent dummies, maybe we need to learn how to not apologize.
Right.
But this freebie, maybe it could be useful in terms of thinking through how do I take responsibility or apologize without putting myself in the doghouse or kind of like over shaming and blaming myself, like owning your stuff, but not shaming and blaming yourself.
Right.
Maybe it could be useful.
Yeah. And then they can also apologize to themselves if it's not like a compassionate apology to themselves. Like, oh, I'm sorry, like I haven't been there for you, or I didn't say this, and moving forward, this is what I'm hoping to strive towards. And then they can also, I sense, educate themselves on what to expect from a healthy apology from someone else in their life, right? As opposed to like some thought terminating cliche.
Yeah. Or apologizing is spiritual bypassing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, I forgive you. And then you move on without actually dealing with the underlying stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I will put links to all of that in the show notes, and you'll have to come back to talk about Gottman or religious trauma part 2. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Marissa.
Okay, bye everybody. Hey girl, it's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster, I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Marissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please find one.